Imagine being locked away, not for what you did, but simply because you said no. You find yourself in a small, cold room, the stone walls pressing close around you. The air is damp and carries the faint, earthy smell of moss growing in cracks. Unseen, flickering candlelight casts restless shadows on the rough surfaces, making the darkness seem alive, moving, breathing. Outside, muffled sounds drift through the thick walls, the distant clang of iron tools, the soft murmur of voices passing by, footsteps on cobblestones. But inside, here, silence wraps you like a heavy cloak. You sit on a narrow wooden bench, the worn surface rough beneath your fingertips. Your breath forms small clouds in the chilly air. The window, if you can call it that, is little more than a slit high above your head, barred with cold iron. It offers no view, only a hint of gray sky beyond, unreachable. This is your world now. A quiet prison built not because you harmed anyone, nor because you were violent or reckless, but because you dared to say no. No to expectations that felt suffocating. No to a path you were forced to follow. No to the silent demands that bound you tighter than these stones. Here, in this stillness, you are labeled mad. Madness, a word heavy with fear and misunderstanding. Yet the truth is simpler and far more frightening. In this world, a woman's refusal is a threat. Saying no breaks the fragile order, the rules written by men who feared the power of a woman's will. And so, the punishment is quiet but cruel. Confinement, isolation, invisibility. Outside these walls, society hums with strict rules. The world you once knew is governed by codes that define your worth by your obedience. To be a woman is to be seen but not heard, to yield but not resist. Your voice, when raised in refusal, echoes like a crack in the grand stone foundation of this order. It is dangerous. It must be silenced. You remember the day it all began, the moment your simple no became a declaration that could not be allowed. Maybe it was a refusal to marry a man chosen for you, or a denial of a harsh demand from family or church. Whatever the cause, it was enough to label you different, unruly, unwell. And that label became a cage. Here, in this dim cell, time loses its shape. Hours stretch endlessly, marked only by the wavering candle flame and the shifting shadows it casts. You feel the weight of loneliness, heavier than any chain. Yet within you, a quiet resistance flickers. The small, stubborn flame of your true self refusing to be snuffed out. Sometimes you press your hand against the cold wall and imagine the world beyond, the fields where wildflowers sway, the marketplace bustling with life, the laughter of children playing in the sun. These memories are your refuge, your secret strength. And still you wonder, why should saying no be so dangerous? Why should refusal be met with fear and confinement? These questions linger in the silence, unanswered but powerful. As you listen to the soft sounds beyond your prison, you might feel a kinship with the many women who lived such stories, women whose lives were shaped not by madness, but by courage, to assert their will in a world designed to suppress it. Their voices, though silenced then, echo faintly now, inviting you to remember and reflect. If you've ever felt unheard or dismissed, I invite you to pause and think about the cost of silence. Share your thoughts if you wish, or just breathe with me as we explore this story together. A story not just of confinement, but of strength, empathy, and the quiet power of saying no. You step outside the narrow stone cell into the bustling heart of a medieval village. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and freshly turned earth, mingling with the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing untamed along the dirt paths. Around you, the rhythm of daily life unfolds with quiet urgency. Women carry baskets, brimming with vegetables from the garden, their hands calloused but deft, moving with practiced grace. Children weave through the market stalls, their laughter ringing like bright notes against the low hum of conversation. In this world, every moment, every movement is shaped by a web of unspoken rules. You quickly learn that your place is not your own to choose. From the moment you awaken, your life is bound to the expectations of family, faith, and community, forces that stretch far beyond your own desires. The village speaks in customs older than the stones beneath your feet, and every woman knows her voice is measured, often stilled. Here, your days might begin with tasks in the hearth, grinding grain, baking bread, tending the animals. You wear a simple linen dress tied tightly at the waist, hair braided or covered, symbols of your modesty and obedience. In the household you serve quietly, your opinions rarely sought, your will often assumed to align with the men who lead. The village elders, the clergy, the lords, their authority shapes not just the land, but the very contours of your thoughts. This is a world ruled by patriarchy, a structure as firm as the castle walls. Men hold the power over land, over law, over family. Women, in contrast, are measured by their ability to maintain honor, not only their own, but that of their father, husband, or brother. Honor is fragile, easily fractured by a word spoken out of turn, a refusal, a desire unvoiced. To say no is not simply personal rebellion. It is an act that threatens the delicate balance of power and order. In the marketplace, you hear the merchants haggle, their voices rising and falling like the tide. Women barter for cloth, salt, and spices, but always within strict limits. Their participation is necessary, yet their presence is carefully contained. Gossip and reputation weave tightly through the community, policing behavior more surely than any law. A woman who steps beyond her bounds risks more than social disapproval. She risks isolation, suspicion, and worse. Religion permeates every corner of life, its teachings echoing in sermons and prayers. The church extols virtues like humility, chastity, and obedience, ideals held especially dear for women. Scriptures and sermons warn against pride and defiance, framing female refusal as sinful or dangerous. These teachings become invisible chains, binding minds as well as bodies. Of course, the experience of women varies widely, from noble ladies who navigate court intrigues behind silken curtains to peasant women whose toil shapes the land. In some distant places, customs differ, but the overarching theme remains. A woman's voice is rarely her own to wield freely. Across continents, whether in the forests of Europe or the bazaars of the Middle East, similar patterns of control echo, each culture weaving its own tapestry of expectations. Have you ever wondered how much freedom we take for granted today? Keep that thought with you as we step deeper into the lives of these women, exploring the silent struggles behind the walls of their homes and hearts. In the quiet moments between chores, some women find small ways to resist. A lingering glance, a whispered word, a refusal veiled in obedience. No. These acts, though subtle, carry the weight of rebellion. But the consequences are never far. Families depend on alliances and marriages. Community survival depends on harmony. A single no can ripple out, threatening reputations and futures. You might imagine the pressure to marry the man chosen for you, to bear children, to keep your mouth closed when faced with injustice. The stakes are high. Saying no can lead to exclusion or punishment, while silence ensures survival, though at great personal cost. As you wander these village paths, the contrast with our own time becomes clear. The freedoms many of us cherish were hard-won, fought over generations by those whose names are lost to history. Their lives remind us that the ability to speak, to refuse, to choose is precious. So, as you lay down with these stories, let yourself reflect gently on the differences between past and present, on the voices once silenced and the voices that now find courage to speak. If this stirs something within you, I invite you to carry that thought with kindness, perhaps to share your reflections, or simply to hold them softly as you drift to rest. In the quiet corners of medieval life, the word mad carried a weight far beyond what we might expect today. It was not a precise diagnosis or a clear description of illness, but rather a vague label used to control, to frighten, and most often to silence women who dared to say no. Imagine a world where defying expectations did not simply invite scorn or punishment, but where it could mean being locked away, your voice erased beneath the heavy judgment of madness. Madness was a shadowy concept then, something loosely understood, tied to behaviors that unsettled the social order. Women who expressed anger, grief, or fear in ways that fell outside prescribed norms were often branded as mad. A woman who rejected her husband, refused to obey her family, or spoke out against injustice could easily find herself deemed mentally unwell. This wasn't about medical understanding as we know it today, it was about power. Power to define who was sane and who was not, often based on compliance. Stories whispered through villages tell of women who faced this cruel fate. There was Margaret, a woman who refused an arranged marriage, insisting she had no wish to be tied to a man she barely knew. Her family, fearing scandal and loss of honor, accused her of fits and strange talk. Soon, Margaret was locked in a small room called Mad for her insistence on choice. Another tale tells of Anna, who mourned deeply for a lost child and spoke loudly in her grief. Her cries, misunderstood and feared, became evidence of madness, and she was confined to a convent, hidden away from the judgmental eyes of her neighbors. These examples reveal a frightening truth. Madness was not a medical condition to be treated, but a tool wielded by those in control to maintain order. It was a label used to erase female autonomy, to turn refusal into pathology. And while the world outside might believe in saints and angels, inside those rooms many women felt forgotten, their minds weighed down by fear, loneliness, and despair. The psychological toll was profound. Imagine the confusion of being told, your feelings, your will, your very thoughts are dangerous or wrong. The isolation that came with confinement, the empty hours, the absence of understanding, deepened the wounds. For many, madness was a sentence not just of imprisonment, but of invisibility. But what exactly did madness mean in this context? It was a shifting idea, often defined by the norms of the day. A woman who spoke too loudly, who resisted with words or actions, who dared to grieve or rage beyond the bounds of silence, she risked being labeled mad. The boundary between sorrow and madness was blurred, controlled by those with the power to decide. What does it mean to be mad? And who decides? These questions linger like shadows in the flickering candlelight, inviting us to reflect on the fragile line between conformity and resistance. Understanding this, we begin to see madness not simply as illness, but as a reflection of the fears and needs of the society around these women. It was easier to label defiance as madness than to confront the discomfort of female autonomy. By locking women away, by calling them mad, the world protected its fragile sense of order at a devastating cost. As you listen, imagine the courage it took to say no in such a world. Each whispered refusal, each silent act of resistance was a seed of strength in a place designed to crush it. The label of madness was meant to extinguish that flame, but in many hearts it burned on, quietly, fiercely. I invite you now to ponder this with me. How often has power been misused to silence those who challenge it? And what might we learn from those whose voices were buried beneath the heavy shadows of madness? If this stirs thoughts within you, feel free to share them or simply hold them gently as we continue to unravel these stories of courage and control. You awaken to the faint flicker of candlelight, its glow casting long shadows on the cold stone walls that surround you. The air is thick with dampness, heavy and still, carrying the faint scent of mold and something faintly metallic like old iron. Your fingers brush the rough surface of the narrow wooden bench beneath you, the splinters pricking gently as you adjust your position. This small, cramped space is your world now, a silent prison with no window to the outside beyond a tiny barred opening high above, letting in only a thin ribbon of pale gray light. Days stretch endlessly here, marked not by clocks or sunlight, but by the subtle rhythms of your breath, the slow burning of a candle, the distant sounds filtering through thick walls. Sometimes you hear footsteps echoing down the stone corridors, voices muffled and low, never quite reaching your ears clearly. Other times, there is only silence, a silence so deep it presses against your skin, making your own thoughts feel louder than they should be. This is the confinement of a woman called mad, a label given not for any clear illness but for refusing to bend, for asserting a will that frightened those around her. You lie awake in this solitude, the walls closing in, the heaviness of loneliness wrapping tightly around your heart. Fear sits beside you like a constant shadow. Fear of what tomorrow might bring, fear of never leaving, fear of being forgotten. Your days follow a quiet, repetitive rhythm. Food is passed through a small hatch. Bread, some thin broth, sustenance that sustains the body but leaves the spirit hungry. There is no company here, only the echo of your own thoughts, memories, and the distant sounds of a life moving on without you. You long for a kind voice, a gentle touch, a moment of understanding, but these are rare gifts in a place built for isolation. The physical space varies. Sometimes a cell in a castle's tower, other times a room in a convent turned prison, or a rudimentary madhouse filled with whispered fears and weary souls. Regardless of where, the experience is much the same: small, bare, cold, and lonely. The stone walls seem to absorb your voice, swallowing your protests before they can even form. In this stillness, confusion often clouds your mind. You ask yourself over and over, why am I here? What did I do to deserve this? The answers are never clear, but the feeling of being trapped, unheard, and misunderstood grows heavier each day. Your sense of time blurs. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into days. The world outside becomes a distant memory, almost a dream. Yet within this darkness, a quiet resistance stirs. You find strength in small acts, holding on to your thoughts, recalling the warmth of sunlight on your skin, whispering prayers or songs softly to yourself. These fragments of memory and hope become shields against despair. In the deepest moments of loneliness, you remember who you are beyond the label forced upon you. Can you feel the weight of silence and walls closing in? Let yourself sit with this feeling for a moment. Imagine the stillness, the isolation, the ache of being unseen. It is a heavy burden, one borne by many women throughout history. The stigma outside these walls is as punishing as the confinement itself. Being called mad marks you forever in the eyes of family and neighbors. You become a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors, a subject of fear and pity rather than compassion. This social exile cuts deeply, severing connections that once offered comfort and belonging. Yet even in this harshest of places, the human spirit seeks ways to endure. Some women find solace in quiet routines, others in prayer or silent defiance. A glance out the barred window, a folded scrap of cloth fashioned into a keepsake, a remembered story shared in whispered thoughts. These small acts of resilience hold the weight of survival. Imagine yourself here now in this space of confinement and uncertainty. Feel the mix of fear, confusion, and quiet strength that lives within. You are not alone, even if the world tries to tell you otherwise. As you listen and breathe, perhaps you can hold a space of empathy for those who endured such hardship. Their stories, though marked by pain, also whisper of endurance and courage. If this moment stirs something within you, I invite you to quietly share your thoughts or simply hold them softly as we continue. Together, we honor the resilience found even in the darkest places. Resistance can be quiet like a whisper against a storm. In the shadowed corners of medieval life, many women found ways to say no, to push back against confinement and rejection, not with loud rebellion, but through small, deliberate acts of defiance. These acts were often hidden, coded, and deeply personal, yet they carried immense power. Imagine the courage it took to claim even a sliver of control in a world designed to deny it. Take, for example, the story of Isolde, a woman from a small village who was ordered to marry a man she did not love. Rather than openly defying her family, she began weaving messages into the cloth she sold at market, patterns that hinted at her wishes, her pain, and her hope for freedom. To outsiders, it was just fine embroidery, but to those who understood, her work became a secret language of resistance. Through this subtle act, she preserved her voice when spoken words might have been dangerous. Others, like Eleanor, found allies in unexpected places. Locked away in a convent for her refusal to conform, Eleanor reached out to the nuns who quietly sympathized with her plight. They shared whispered prayers and exchanged letters written in coded phrases, offering comfort and a reminder that she was not alone. These hidden networks were lifelines, weaving solidarity where official support was absent. Sometimes resistance took the form of refusal within obedience, a paradox that women mastered with quiet strength. A woman might agree outwardly but subtly, delay, deflect, or redirect expectations to maintain a sense of autonomy. These small gestures, pausing before answering, choosing silence, tending to tasks in her own time, were acts of reclaiming space in a world that sought to erase it. There are tales of women who feigned madness to escape harsher punishments or unwanted marriages, using the label forced upon them as a shield rather than a shackle. By appearing to accept the label of madness, they gained a peculiar freedom within confinement, a space where strict expectations softened and survival became possible. Their resistance was complex, a dance between submission and control. In one recorded exchange, a woman named Matilda, confined for her outspokenness, was asked why she continued to protest despite the danger. She replied softly, "My voice may be small, but it is mine." This simple assertion reveals the heart of resistance, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steadfast refusal to be erased. These stories remind us that voice and refusal have always been intertwined with risk. To say no was to invite punishment, yet to stay silent meant surrendering the self. For many women, resistance was not a single moment of courage, but a series of small, daily decisions to hold on to identity and hope. What small acts of courage have you witnessed or experienced? Resistance can take many forms, sometimes as subtle as a glance, a whispered word, or a secret hope kept alive. Reflect on these quiet rebellions in your own life or the lives of those around you. If you feel moved to share, your thoughts are welcome, but if not, simply hold these stories softly as we continue. Through these whispers of resistance, we glimpse the resilience of women who, despite confinement and rejection, found ways to say no and survive. Their strength lies not only in defiance, but in the deep, enduring human need to be heard and seen. Family, community, and religion. These were the pillars shaping the lives of medieval women, the unseen forces that could either protect or condemn. Imagine living in a world where your fate was not yours alone, but woven tightly into the expectations and fears of those around you. It was within these webs of relationships that many women found themselves labeled mad, confined, or silenced, not always by cruelty, but often by the complicated, sometimes contradictory actions of those closest to them. Family was often the first line of judgment. Fathers, husbands, brothers, men who held authority in both law and custom, made decisions that affected women's lives deeply. A daughter's refusal to marry a chosen suitor was not just a personal rebellion. It was a threat to family honor, reputation, and alliances. Families feared shame more than they feared the pain of their daughters. Sometimes this fear led them to confine or label their own kin as mad, believing it was necessary to protect the greater good. Yet alongside this harshness, there were acts of protection and compassion. Mothers, sisters, and even fathers sometimes quietly shielded their daughters from the worst, pleading for kindness or bending rules when they could. Neighbors and the wider community played a powerful role too. Villages were small and close-knit. Everyone knew everyone's business. Gossip spread quickly and reputation was fragile. If a woman acted outside accepted norms, speaking too boldly, mourning too openly, or simply saying no, whispers began. These murmurs could grow into accusations, isolating her socially long before any formal confinement. Yet, community could also be a source of support. Some neighbors offered comfort in quiet ways. A shared meal, a listening ear, a secret nod. Of solidarity, the same village that could ostracize could also embrace, depending on who held the loudest voice. Religion was woven deeply into every aspect of medieval life, and the church's teachings shaped how madness and disobedience were understood. Religious leaders often reinforced patriarchal views, preaching obedience, humility, and submission, especially for women. Disobedience was not only social defiance, but a sin against divine order. In many cases, religious institutions became the places where women deemed mad were sent, convents or monasteries acting as prisons as much as places of sanctuary. Yet within these walls, compassion sometimes bloomed. Some nuns and priests offered, genuine care and comfort, tending to women's physical and spiritual needs, creating pockets of kindness amid confinement. In every story there are many voices, some kind, some harsh. Which voices do you hear most clearly here? The voices of fearful families trying to preserve honor? The whispers of a wary community? The prayers and gentle hands of those who sought to heal? Or the silent cries of women caught in the middle, navigating these complex relationships? This interplay of complicity and compassion reminds us that history is rarely simple. The systems that confined women were upheld by real people, each with their own fears, hopes, and limitations. Understanding this helps us approach these stories with empathy, seeing both the harm done and the humanity behind it. As you reflect on these tangled webs of family, community, and religion, consider how these forces shape our own lives today. Community can harm and heal, silence and support. If this resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts on the power of community, how it can both bind and free us, or simply hold these reflections gently as you rest. How do the echoes of the past still whisper in our lives today? It's a question that invites us to look closely at the threads connecting centuries, to hear the faint voices of those who came before, and understand how their struggles ripple through time. The medieval world, with its harsh silencing of women's refusal and its use of madness to confine those who defied norms, laid foundations that shaped much more than the stone walls of prisons or convents. These patterns seeped into culture, law, and medicine, influencing how society viewed women's voices and mental health for generations. Even now, we carry echoes of those old fears and controls. The stigma around mental illness, especially in women, often traces back to centuries when emotions were dismissed as hysteria or madness. Women speaking out too boldly can still face judgment or dismissal. The tension between being heard and being silenced continues to play out in homes, workplaces, and communities worldwide. Yet alongside these challenges, there is progress. The resilience of those medieval women who whispered no against the storm lives on in every modern act of courage to claim one's voice. Today, more than ever, there is growing recognition of the importance of listening to women, to marginalized voices, to mental health struggles with empathy and care. The legacy of silencing is not just a tale of loss, but also one of strength and survival. Movements for women's rights, mental health awareness, and social justice are part of a long conversation, started by countless unnamed women who refused to be erased. Their quiet resistance set the stage for the conversations and changes we see today. As you listen quietly now, I invite you to feel that connection across time, to honor both the pain of silencing and the hope carried forward by resilience. Each story shared, each voice raised gently, helps dismantle old barriers and build new paths toward understanding. If this story has touched you or sparked a thought, I warmly invite you to subscribe or share it with others who may find comfort in these reflections. Together we keep these echoes alive, not as chains but as reminders of how far we've come and how far kindness and courage can still carry us. Imagine, for a moment, stepping out from the cold stone walls that once held you captive, the silence lifting like morning mist, revealing a world bathed in gentle light. Here your voice is no longer a secret to be hidden or a threat to be feared. Saying no is met with respect, heard with kindness, and met with understanding. This world, though distant from the one you knew, feels warm and safe, a place where your thoughts and feelings have space to breathe. As you settle into this vision, take a deep, slow breath. Let the tension in your body soften, the weight of old fears begin to lift. Know that the journey you have traveled through these stories is one of compassion and remembrance. You have walked beside women who were silenced, confined, and misunderstood. Yet you have also witnessed their quiet strength, their courage to hold on to selfhood amid shadows. It is natural to feel a mix of emotions now: sorrow for the hardships endured, empathy for lives constrained, but also hope. Hope born from the resilience woven through every whispered refusal and every small act of defiance. These stories remind us that even in the darkest places, the human spirit seeks light. They teach us about the importance of listening deeply, of honoring voices that history tried to erase. As you let these reflections settle, imagine carrying this empathy gently within you. Let it shape how you see the world around you, the people you meet, the voices you hear, the silences you encounter. Empathy is a quiet power, a bridge that connects us beyond time and circumstance. It invites patience, kindness, and a willingness to understand even when it is difficult. You may find yourself pondering the ways in which society still struggles with silencing and misunderstanding. But alongside this, remember the progress made in the many voices today rising in courage and clarity. The legacy of those medieval women is alive in every act of listening, every moment of respect for boundaries, every affirmation that to say no is a right, not a rebellion. As you prepare to rest, let the softness of this knowledge soothe your mind. You have shared in a story that holds pain but also profound humanity. Let it settle like a gentle lullaby, easing you toward peaceful sleep, knowing you carry within you the light of awareness and compassion. If this story touched you, I invite you to carry this empathy forward in your thoughts, words, and actions. Thank you for listening.